Welcome to Latter-day Saints, where we practice brolygamy in its true form. A movie came out this week called Heretic. It's the story of Hugh Grant entrapping sister missionaries and forcing them to confront their faith through devious philosophical mind games. Is that a fair recap?
I think that's perfect.
Oh, yeah.
So the topic tonight is portrayal of Mormons in media. In my view, the sister missionaries overall were smart, strong, cool, and even kind of funny. How do you guys feel about them?
Yeah, I think overall I give the portrayal like an A.
Yeah, I mean, there was two of them, right? And one of them, to me, was a little bit more like the more classic, naive, young missionary. And the other one was the one who... And actually, it's kind of funny. You remember how when he's asking them where they're from, she's like, oh, and she's from Salt Lake. And she's like, no. She was very quick to point out, no, I'm from like Philadelphia. Right,
yes.
Yeah. And she was the probably the stronger than average type. So I think they showed both sides of the coin there.
Yeah.
She was the slightly more edgy one.
Was she the one talking about Magnum condoms?
They were both talking about it.
Oh, they were both talking about condoms. Okay,
All right,
as missionaries do.
Should we address that? Because
Start with the Magnum condoms.
while we love the portrayal, I think, of the sister missionaries in the show, they did open up with the cringiest, worst monologue of all time. Not just if Magnum condoms truly are jumbo size, but one of them gained testimony through pornography.
What's terrible about it?
It's just a cringy conversation.
I mean, it's cringy, but are some missionaries not cringy?
No, you're right. So I think when we know there's going to be a movie about, Mormonism, our fear is that they're going to come off as like dumb, gullible, naive, and cringy. And in this case, they were. The issue for me here is that, like, tonally, it didn't fit in with the rest of the movie. The rest of the movie, I think we'd agree, was magnificently written. And that first 5 minutes almost felt like, to me, they had shot the movie, then realized they wanted, like, an opening establishing scene. So they went back and, like, reshot an opener and maybe just slapped together some kind of dialogue. And it didn't fit in with the rest of anything they talked about.
It didn't add anything to the movie, for sure. It didn't really, I suppose, in hindsight, it didn't serve a purpose, did it?
It's possible you're comfortable enough with your companion to talk about, past things. But the fact that she used it as a testimony builder,
Yeah.
it was the dumbest thing. With these movies, they clearly have, like, consultants, people who know about the church. It feels like they cross streams. It's like testimonies, shouldn't watch porn, let's combine those two things.
Hold on. Think back to every fast and testimony meeting you've been in, especially during your time in Utah, and think of all the things that people have claimed to have built their testimony and affirmed their testimony. Some of the stupidest, dumbest anecdotes that you've heard. Watching porn ain't the worst. It's not the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to backtrack because I actually just heard a testimony meeting where the guy talked about that in his testimony, and this was recent.
There you go.
So, yeah, you're right. You're
there
right.
you go. Admittedly, it was a weird conversation, and it didn't add value to the movie.
To me, it set up just being worried like all these sisters are going to be just dorky and cringy and horrible. It set a bad precedent. Then I was pleasantly surprised right after that how good it got.
Yes.
I do love
Was it an attempt to be funny? Were they trying to just be comical at that point, like lighthearted and funny?
Maybe an attempt to kind of break the ice.
Yeah.
Whatever they were attempting, if it was good, it did not work for me. I hated the first 5 minutes. Love the next 60 minutes.
Yes.
The line of her really quickly clarifying that she's from Philadelphia, not Utah, that resonates with me. Because I do have the shame of having lived in Utah. But the reason why I moved to Hawaii to have a 1-year buffer year before moving back to Detroit is that I want to be known as the Hawaii family, not the Utah family. So we've shed that shame, and now people don't even know that we lived in Utah because they came from Hawaii.
You just told everyone.
That was the whole purpose of it.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the portrayal of Mormons, and we thought the sister missionaries were great people. For sure, the audience was rooting for them pretty early in the movie.
Yes.
Let's talk about the accuracy of just church functions and missions in general. The weird thing I thought is there was a missionary in this movie who did show up later looking for the sisters when they didn't come home. He didn't have a companion.
The old guy.
Yeah.
He looked like he was like 30, but with gray hair.
He weren't old enough to be a senior missionary, and he definitely wasn't young enough to be a real one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he was by himself, and when you meet him, he's sweeping the church. So ostensibly his mission was to be a church janitor. I don't understand what's going on with this guy.
Yeah, I don't get that either. Like in the church, age cutoff for younger missionaries is 28. Like once you're 28, you can no longer serve a mission until you're like an old person.
But you do get people serving missions who are somewhat infirmed, right? This guy could, have some kind of mental disability.
Oh, so you think he was a local church service missionary? It was curious he was sweeping the church alone at 5 p.m.
in the dark?
Well, he also, his whole thing that sparked him looking for him is that he looks at this list and he sees that Sister Parker and Sister
Barnes,
that they have each signed off about cleaning the church, and they weren't there that day. And so it's like having the missionaries clean the church every day, signing off at 5 p.m. Like what that doesn't, like 5 p.m. is like your missionary scheduled dinner time. And then did you notice that the chapel had a tile floor? Like in my experience, every chapel is carpeted.
I thought the chapel they used looked more like a Catholic chapel or some other church's chapel that they just stuck a guy with a name badge on.
But the other question is, does it matter? Were they trying to be accurate? Did it matter?
To discuss.
What?
Yeah, but I mean, we're discussing the portrayal of Mormons in the media, right? In terms of like the accuracy of the age and what he was doing, and like, does it matter for the purposes of Heretic? Probably not, right? I mean,
yeah, it's just that's not how missions work. And the problem, it doesn't work for the movie either, because the whole purpose of him stopping by didn't add anything to the movie except it distracted Hugh Grant for a few minutes so the sisters could slowly steal some matches, which we've talked about, that they don't know how to light.
it was a plot device.
It was like a 25-minute waste of the movie. That's when I started hating the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is the sister she was on birth control.
It was an implant, right? She might have had that implant in for like bloody years.
Yeah.
How do those implants work? How long do they stand for?
They can be in there for up to 10, 15 years.
Okay, so it's not a church rule to get those out before you go on a mission.
I mean, how would they even know she had it in, right? And
I mean,
Hugh Grant knew just by looking at her arm.
well, to be fair, he thought it was a microchip, right? But like,
Or
can we
did
talk
he?
about like how
That's just what he was
adeptly
saying.
Hugh Grant sliced her arm open, was like fishing around and pulled that thing out? But that was one of the funniest bits in the movie. He's fishing around and he thought he had. He goes, "Oh, just a vein," and pushed it back in and dug around a bit more, and he found the thing.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I want to cover is the content of these movies, because the reason why a lot of members of the church don't watch movies about them is because they typically have explicit content. Heretic, I think, was rated R only for that one scene with the vein, because it wasn't very gory. I don't think there's much language at all in it.
I mean, there were some jump scares with like the
Right, but you see those in PG-13 horror
Yeah.
films all the
true,
time.
yeah. It was rated R, was it?
It was, yeah. I had to look it up after the fact. It
Yeah,
surprised me it was
I wouldn't
rated
have
R.
been surprised if it was PG-13.
I mean, yeah, that's got to be I'd agree with you.
He did
There
cut a
wasn't
woman's finger
much
off.
More than that.
Right, maybe just a little gory out of PG-13, but
he was keeping women in a cage, and he cut one of their fingers off.
yeah.
So in terms of, it was a bit torture-y, a bit torture porny.
Let's do this. Is Heretic a movie you would recommend to people outside of the church?
You're talking about people in the church not watching media about the church.
Right, exactly. So this is a difficult conversation to have. It's maybe a little controversial because I would venture to guess that most Mormons don't watch movies about Mormons that aren't made by the Mormon church because, one, they assume that it's going to portray us negatively
That's the main
or unfairly.
thing,
yeah.
And two, they generally are kind of, more explicit, rated R, HBO kind of style movies. Mm-hmm. And a lot of members of the church avoid that. So tonight we're talking about, in my view, the Mount Rushmore of mainstream Mormons in the media, at least for the last 20 years. Heretic, Big Love, Under the Banner of Heaven, Book of Mormon musical. Anecdotally, I think 95% of members of the church haven't seen any of these.
I would agree.
Yeah. I mean,
I would agree.
yeah. I mean, so I watched Big Love, and I watched some of it with my wife. It got to that the famous scene, and she was just like, no. Yeah, she felt it was almost like sacrilegious to keep watching it. Like, she didn't want to watch it, and I think for what you said, she assumed that it's just going to be slanderous and just beating on the church.
Big Love and Under the Banner of Heaven do have temple scenes in them. This is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and of course they I mean, most Mormons immediately assume you can't show that on TV, and it's blasphemous to do so. And
Like, there's certain things they showed on Big Love were definitely blasphemous.
but is it blasphemous to show it? If you show it accurately,
It was. Did you remember what they showed?
to be fair,
They did the.
Tom Hanks isn't LDS though,
It
so
doesn't
he
matter.
never commented
Yeah,
everything.
but that's what makes it blasphemous. Is because like these are things that are should not be just broadcast out. These are sacred things.
And if Tom Hanks was LDS, I would agree that it was inappropriate, but he didn't covenant to not show it, right? He looked his stuff up somewhere and he showed it.
Yeah.
And if we as LDS watch it, we're not breaking the covenant by watching it, right?
I agree with that. I watched
So-
it, but
If it was an LDS person who put it into a movie, I would agree. I say, yeah, now they're taking the piss because you covenanted not to do that. But Tom Hanks, he didn't.
It's hard to watch something like that in a TV show because without any context or buildup or education about it, it just seems bizarre.
Oh, it's back crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is why we have temple preparation. Ideally, maybe even a lifetime of looking forward to the temple. You slowly build up to understanding what it's about. When you just cold turkey slap that in someone's face, it does look deranged. So this is what I get worried about. That I do feel like is unfair.
yeah, but I don't think that's something that's unique to the temple either, because if you've ever been to a Catholic mass, like the Latin chanting and the ups and the downs,
That is also
if
odd.
you're not
Yeah.
used to that,
Yeah.
it also seems very strange. I mean, honestly, anything that carries an air of ritual seems strange if you're not in some way connected or participating in that ritual.
And not just Christian as well, any religion, right?
Yeah.
Well, not even
Yeah.
religion. So to your
You
point,
go to a voodoo birthday party, cutting goats' heads off and dancing around and spraying blood. Without context, it seems weird, but
well, and then to your point, so I was watching a video today. There's a bunch of Detroit Lions fans flying to Houston today because the Lions play in Houston tomorrow. And on the plane, they're chanting the name of our quarterback, Jared Goff. Jared Goff. And after 30 seconds, I'm like, I'm part of a cult. Like even anything without
he
context.
said
can
whilst
seem
wearing the
strange.
pajamas.
The full garment.
Literally. I have mixed feelings about this. It's the same thing like if someone's talking about temple stuff on the internet or stuff about magic underwear comes up, and a lot of LDS people immediately get very defensive and sensitive about the fact that anyone's even discussing this. But the fact is, we didn't happen upon these things. These things, we created these things. We put them out there into the universe, and eventually the world's going to come across them and poke them, and sometimes make fun of it. I mean,
Well, and we can't have it both ways.
funny.
Like people think we're secretive, but we're like the most proselytizing visitors welcome churches. Like we actually have tens of thousands of people trying to get people in the building.
Yeah.
Well, we can't have
we're just talking about how upset we are, or how upset some people are that there's a HBO we're showing something from the temple on their program.
For me,
Would
it's
any
just-
other religion? Is there any other religion that has like a ritual or something where it's blasphemous to even show it on TV?
no, but you're right. The church can't have it both ways. We can't be like everybody come learn, but you got to learn on our schedule. And
Yeah,
our
that's
own
it.
time.
That's exactly
Eventually,
it.
we'll get out everywhere. And the church has got better about that. We have pictures of temple robes and garments on our website now. Like anyone can look it up. So this is the thing. Temple's heavy on symbolism. It feels like when you just smash cut to a shot of someone at the veil in an HBO show, and
Yeah.
they've only vaguely referenced the temple along the way. It just feels like it's made for shock value. It feels
Yeah.
like it does a disservice. They haven't explained anything that's going to happen. It just is suddenly on screen. Where the storyteller should educate the audience on what the purpose of this is and what's going to happen.
Yeah.
That is an interesting take. But you think that's what they were doing? You think they were going for shock?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean,
But if you remember if you remember that the context of the scene, it was Barbara, right?
Yes.
And Barbara, who left the LDS church to be with her polygamous husband and to live that lifestyle, and had sacrificed all her personal relationships to do so. This was kind of like her last-ditch attempt at fulfilling this spiritual ambition that she had had growing up in the church. So to me, at least, this wasn't like, hey, here's Mormons being weird in the temple. This was kind of like a tender moment for her where she was finally fulfilling this ambition, again, admittedly against all the rules, and the way it was done was kind of odd.
Well,
but
yeah, she was literally about to get excommunicated. She didn't
Well,
have a
that's-
recommend,
yeah,
and she
yeah.
used her mom and sister to sneak her in.
Her mom snuck her in, yeah.
Again, it wasn't about, hey, look at how weird the Mormons is. They had like 4 seasons of Mormons being weird by this point, right? They didn't need to up the weirdometer at all. And then that's actually, I think actually the fact that she was doing it as a pariah, kind of as someone who was using someone else's temple recommend, just made it all the more tragic that these are the lengths that she had to go to
it-
finally achieve this goal.
Well, I think it fits in with the rest of her story from then on as well.
Well, sure, but yeah, I guess a long way to say that. To me, at least, it didn't feel like they were doing it for shock value. Were you shocked when you saw it, Chad?
I had heard there was a temple scene, so I was expecting it.
But was it shocking?
It's hard to watch.
Was it hard for you, Ben?
There was one part that was. The rest of it wasn't.
So again, this is just my opinion, but to me, it's almost more interesting that we, as LDS people who are familiar with the subject matter, were shocked by what was actually, to be fair, a fairly accurate portrayal. It's weird to us. Yeah. It's more interesting to me that we were shocked to see it on TV than the fact that it wasn't there at all.
So this is the crux of the issue. You know, these things are sacred to LDS church-going people, and they don't want it to be shown that way. So things that are precious to you can become offensive.
Did it make it less sacred, though, by showing it on TV like that? Again, it was fairly accurately portrayed, right? They didn't make up the lines. They didn't...
Well, I also believe there's people who have snuck cameras into temple ceremonies, so you can just watch them on YouTube if you want.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Yeah. I mean,
sit there and watch 3 hours of temple on YouTube.
Anything and everything about it has been...
If you want to do that, just go to the actual bloody... It's not hard. It's not hard to get a temple recommend. Go do the real thing. I mean, it takes a couple of years, but it's not like...
anything and everything about the temple can be found online.
Right. So to your point, the fact that it's out there, exists publicly, doesn't make it any less sacred to us.
Right. That's it. It doesn't take away from it. Just the fact that HBO showed it.
But watching it feels different when it's sacred to you. Like, if I were to pull up a YouTube and watch it on YouTube versus actually going, I would feel dirty and wrong.
I wouldn't even. But hang on, that's a little bit different, because if that's some scumbag on YouTube who snuck a camera in, then it's like, okay, here's someone who's actually a member who's doing something scummy. And, why are they filming it undercover and putting it online? That's scummy. But if it's Tom Hanks and HBO and he's doing it because it's part of the plot and it's part of this character development, to me, it's not scummy.
Good to have this perspective, because you joined the church later as an adult.
And admittedly, I'm not really offended by anything, and I have a heart made of ice, so maybe that's why.
Well, it's good to have that perspective, because there are things that when you raised up in the culture of the church.
I thought you said in the cult. I'm glad you finished the word there.
When
you're raised up in the culture of the church, maybe you are more precious about things as opposed coming in later, and these things aren't like what you're growing up with. So maybe it is a little less.
Maybe. I'm not saying you guys are wrong. I'm just saying that
I mean, I think most religions have certain things that they hold in reverence, and to see it depicted in a different manner, it feels wrong and blasphemous. Like, for example, the Muslims, you can't make any depiction of the Prophet Muhammad. Trying to depict him to them is blasphemous and wrong because of their held beliefs. I mean, for Christians, like certain things that Family Guy does, than the way they depict Christ. I mean, it just feels a little too far, sacrilegious and blasphemous when you just take that extra step, right? I mean, I'm sure there's certain things.
Gary can't stop laughing, thinking about the things that you find blasphemous.
I can still laugh at it, but anyway, there are certain ways that it can be depicted that become offensive because these are things that are held to a very high standard.
So that's a good point. How many times have you watched another religion depicted in some way and we never batted an eye because it's not our religion? So.
Yeah. But the Catholics don't get mad if in a movie if they show mass, right? And the Muslims don't get mad if you.
Yeah, well, we don't get mad if we show sacrament meeting.
Well, it goes back to my point. How many religions out there do have something where it's okay to do it and to know about it, but for some reason it's not okay to put it on TV.
Well, Catholics don't have that issue because if there's a movie or TV show about Catholics, it's almost always about pedophilia.
That's true. They don't like that pedophilia being put out there.
Yeah.
So that is the question I want to ask. Should Mormons feel particularly slighted by the media, or is it just part and parcel for how Hollywood represents anybody and anything?
I mean, that's something I've thought about a lot, because when this originally aired, I was a kid. I believe I was probably around high school age.
You're talking about Big Love?
Yes, Big Love. When this scene that we've been discussing aired. Yeah, I was in high school. I remember someone from my class talking about the show. They had watched it. And I knew nothing about the show, and most of how I felt at the time came because of the other adults in my life that I heard describing it, and they were very offended that even of the idea of it.
This is the idea of it meaning not just the temple scene.
The idea of the temple scene, yes.
Oh, so it was specific to the temple scene. They didn't care that there was a show about polygamists out there. That didn't offend them.
No, specifically the temple scene. Having watched through nearly the entirety of Big Love and seeing the scene myself, it didn't. I mean, there was the one moment where I was just like, but I didn't feel nearly as upset, I guess. So to your point, Gary, I can kind of see that, and I don't see the value in getting up in arms about it, because I remember talks of boycott this and all sorts of stuff and signing petitions and.
I also want to clarify, just to shed the stain of Utah, you nor I are from Utah. We're both from the coast, which has very few members that we were raised up with.
Yes, I mean, when I was in high school, I mean, me and my sister were the only members in my entire high school.
That's exactly right. Same with me, yeah.
But actually, so just two thoughts, just quickly. It is funny that when LDS people object to the show Big Love, they're objecting to this one 20-second scene in like season 4 or 5. And no one objects to the fact that they're making a show about polygamy, the thing that most people associate Mormons with. You tell someone you're Mormon, the first question is, how many wives have you got? No one's objected to the fact that they're doing a show that's perpetuating the idea that Mormons practice polygamy. No one cares about that. We're all absolutely fine with that, apparently.
So I want to address that. I was shocked by Big Love. I actually thought it was unflinchingly fair toward members of the church in differentiating that Mormons are not polygamists. This is some weird group of compound people. And the Mormons in the show are very anti-polygamy. The polygamists are the bad guys in the show trying to hide in plain daylight.
But I think the reason, if someone actually did bother to watch the show, the reason why they probably would get upset is the FLDS, well, they don't call themselves FLDS, but the people who practice polygamy, in various times in the show, the subject comes up of, well, why are you still practicing polygamy when the rest of the Mormon community isn't? There's actually a scene, I think it's in like the first few episodes, where Roman's got the journalist there?
Yes.
And the subject of polygamy comes up, and he turns around and he actually makes some very valid points that like by what revelation was polygamy taken back? It was done kind of quietly after
it was
after
removed
that.
by revelation.
We do believe it was by revelation, although an opponent of the church could say it was conveniently timed up with the government telling us we can't do it. So the polygamists in this show, they end up basically mostly dead or arrested over time. They are illegal, like that's very clear. But they do make some points, because for a church, mainstream Mormonism, which is all about restoration of things as they were, their point is, you guys are the ones that changed. We haven't.
Yeah, I think that's why some people, if they watch a show, would be like, okay, Tom Hanks is given a platform to these views, which is basically saying that the LDS church is defunct by the fact that they succumbed to the federal government, and the real faithful are the ones out in the bloody compounds marrying 12-year-olds. I started reading that about the manifesto or the declaration or whatever it's called, and I don't know. It is very political. It was very politically motivated, and it sounded like there was like 100 good practical reasons why they should stop practicing polygamy, but you can't say stop doing it because it makes sense. You got to say it's revelation, right? So they call it revelation, but there's like 100 good reasons why they did probably just stop doing it, because it was really inconvenient.
I mean, you can say the same thing about all men receiving the priesthood in the 70s. It seemed a little convenient for the culture at the time as well.
Well, that's it, exactly. And there's other things as well which have been undone under the banner of revelation, when really it just had to be stopped because it wasn't making sense anymore.
Well, I mean, too, as a point against those that say, oh, well, they stopped polygamy and they changed and they shouldn't have, Joseph Smith also attempted to institute what we call the law of consecration, which is where members live with all things common. It's almost like a version of communism, but it's all on a volunteer basis, and it's not a government enforced basis. And so people voluntarily share everything that they own. I mean, there were a few times where they attempted to have this practice enacted, and it failed. People were corrupt and they took advantage, and this was stopped. And still to this day, when we go to the covenant, when we go to the temple, we covenant to accept this law of consecration, of having all things in common, but it is not a law that we are asked to live currently.
So I thought the show did a great job portraying, or at least differentiating Mormonism to polygamists.
Yes.
Over and over. That's kind of like the whole opposition in the show is like these polygamists versus Mormons.
Well,
However, when I talk to people who watch Big Love, non-member people, just regular people who love watching HBO or whatever, watching good TV, all of them didn't realize there was a difference. They still wrap polygamy and Mormonism all together. Where to me it was like it's nonstop. These guys are not Mormons.
well, the last season is when he's elected into the city senate. It's just like this huge conflict. Is like the church is trying to tell him, you need to stop. People are going to get confused because you're connecting yourself to us, and you need to stop that. And that's a huge plot point throughout that.
Well, and to add to the confusion, I watched Under the Banner of Heaven a few years ago when it came out. But even today, I had to look up, like, was that guy LDS or FLDS? And he was FLDS, but in my memory, I don't remember if he was or not. So it does get confusing over time. It all feels like one thing.
Would FLDS people call themselves FLDS, or would they just call themselves LDS?
Even Bill Paxton calls himself a Mormon fundamentalist, and then
he does call himself a fundamentalist.
He calls himself a Mormon fundamentalist, and the contention is they didn't want him to use the name Mormon, and he refused to give up the Mormon aspect of his Mormon fundamentalist.
Right, because their view is that they are the true church, right, and the LDS are the deviants.
Okay, so for the portrayal of LDS people in Big Love, what did you guys think?
I mean, I don't see any issues with the people, other than the missionaries in the season 1.
So let's talk about that.
Okay, so in season 1, the missionaries come and knock on Nikki's door, and they're having
hilarious.
They were
such dicks.
Well, they looked really old, so they didn't look young.
They looked like they were in their 30s, right? Or
They
late
looked
20s.
like they were way too like nerdy, and
they were so nerdy and very nasally, if I remember rightly.
And they were talking.
We're gonna put you on the list.
They leave, and then somehow they just assume because she knows about the Doctrine and Covenant scriptures that she has to be a polygamist. And then they're like, they're writing her address down, and we're going to put you down as non-cooperative. And it was just so cringe and so weird. And honestly, like, I served my mission in Salt Lake City. Like, there are people that used to be members of the church that are not anymore. There are people that are still members of the church, but they're not active, and they move around. And so you don't even know, like, if you're a missionary and you know all the members that live in the area. But you know, if you move and you don't tell anybody where you move, then the local church doesn't know that you're a member. And so it's just like there's a million reasons why she could have that knowledge. And polygamy is like the furthest, especially since she lives alone. Like, by all means, she's just like, she's got kids and she's a single mom. Like, there is absolutely zero reason why they would ever consider her a polygamist.
So when I watched it, I was like, no missionaries act like this.
I literally thought it was a dream. I thought it was a dream scene.
These are the sort of things you dream about?
I thought she was because she was scared of
nasally missionaries.
No, she was scared of being found out. So I thought Nikki was.
Oh, you thought she was having a dream?
I thought she was having a dream.
Oh, I thought you were dreaming about.
Oh, I thought the scene in the show was Nikki having a nightmare about being found out.
No, I can see how you think that. It was a bit
because
surreal.
of how it went, and then it was like, wait, that actually happened.
I just wonder, because we do come to find out in that neighborhood there are multiple polygamous families hiding in plain sight. Is a possible mission president, stake president's like, hey, elders, as you go along, try to suss out the polygamists in the area for our records?
I mean,
that why they were so hard on it?
Not when I was there. I was a missionary in Salt Lake around the same time, and no, there is absolutely zero chance that any of that would happen.
I could be wrong, but if I was a polygamist in Utah, I wouldn't live in Salt Lake. Too expensive to afford all that real estate, right? Really? Like,
no, he owned 3 homes.
But in Sandy, right?
If he has them now, he's a multimillionaire.
But that was in Sandy, right?
Yeah, but even now Sandy's expensive.
Well, I know. But I mean, even if you go back 20 years before the Utah boom, Salt Lake would be an expensive place to have like a 12-bedroom house.
So an interesting statistic, 60% of the population living in Salt Lake City were not members of the church.
What percent?
60. So the majority of people in Salt Lake City were not members of the church.
Because of the bloody University of Utah. Probably a big portion of Salt Lake's population is U of U students, and they're all just
deviants,
angry little Mormon kids who didn't get into BYU, so they go up to Salt Lake and rebel.
angry Mormon kids that aren't members of the church.
Hang on. My brain just inverted. Hang on. I'm confused.
I think you put your BYU goggles on and you just
No, this is true. No, that's probably why. That's probably
that's
why.
True, but that's a separate thing. So 60% of the population were never members of the church.
I live in Orem, Provo area, and I can confirm statistically that I think 105% of the people are Mormon there still. So that hasn't changed at all. All right, so for those missionaries, yeah, totally over the line, ridiculous. Yeah. Although I'll say I did know one missionary who at a member's lunch, the food wasn't quite ready for like 10 minutes. So instead of sitting and talking, he disappeared. So I went to go find him, and he was sitting in some dark room praying. So I was like, Elder, what are you doing? And he was like, I know they say you can't be perfect, but I'm going to get as close as possible.
Oh, piss off.
Oh, yeah, you do get...
So I say 99% of missionaries, awesome, cool, normal kids, trying to do good things, trying to have a good time. They're not going to push you, be pushy at all. There are a full handful of tryhards in every mission who are just ridiculous.
Right.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But I guess going back to like Big Love, missionaries are a tiny, tiny, tiny part of the show, right? I mean...
Well, it was just one scene.
Yeah,
that was it.
Yeah, one scene. So I guess like...
I mean, apart from that, all the other members, like Barb's family and the neighbors across the street...
They felt a bit hammy, though, didn't they? Do you remember like the very first episode where like Bill's... Yeah, it was his son, right? His son's in the car with his girlfriend, they're making out, and his buddy's like, hey, come on, man. He's like, come on, choose the right.
Oh, well, that was... Yeah, but that stuff happens. Like, I've seen kids like that. So it's not like inaccurate.
At some point in the segment, you got to show the clip of where Bill and his little sidekick business partner, Bill was telling him about the dream that he had. You know, he's saying, like, oh, I didn't sleep very well. I had this bad dream. And the other guy's like, well, maybe it's a revelation. Yeah. Sometimes revelation comes in dreams.
Yeah.
And it's like the whole thing, it just felt so hammy and like forced and just like, it's like someone had Googled Mormons for like 2 minutes and then had wrote that whole scene. It just felt like
I've
crap.
seen people have that exact conversation, though.
Oh, what, in Salt Lake?
Some people do
Maybe we are that hammy. We might be that hammy.
The spiritualism is a spectrum, so you get people who are more,
autism.
You get more into it, and people who are not.
I mean, as far as like the lingo and stuff goes, I think Big Love is probably the closest out of all of them with like integrating the vocabulary that we use in the Mormon church in a natural way. Under the banner of heaven, it was like they took all these words that we use and then they try to it's like I don't know how they speak over in England, and you give me a bunch of British words and try to tell me to like write some dialogue as a British person.
You do know how they speak in England. You do a good impression.
No, it's like, but like the sayings and stuff.
Oh,
like,
right.
I mean, how
like
often
all the knuckers and
how often do Americans butcher
just,
British phrases to you?
Oh, don't get me started on Dick Van Dyke.
It's like someone was just given these words, like, oh, these are the words they use, and so they just wrote dialogue.
And word salad vomiting out.
Yeah, those words are in our vocabulary, but that's not how we use them.
I mean, Hollywood just does that all the time to all weird subsets of people, right?
I mean, Big Love kind of nailed it.
That's a great show.
So for the portrayal of Mormons of the members of the church in Big Love, Little Hammy, the girl who played Deb in Napoleon Dynamite.
Yeah.
I think her opening line is like, I think chastity is brave, like things like that.
Yeah.
I thought over time the bishops in the show were portrayed as a little colder and a little out of touch.
The bishops were portrayed as if it was like a job.
Yeah, for sure.
Like a full-time job.
And then as the show goes on, I felt like the church itself became kind of this like cold corporation in the shadows trying to control things.
Yeah.
By and large, though, for a 5-season show set in Utah surrounded by Mormons, 9 out of 10.
Oh yeah,
a portrayal.
Yeah.
I'd give it a good 9 out of 10.
I give it 9 out of 10 as far as like the people. There are other aspects of like positions and processes and other things like that they get wrong, like the excommunication of Barb, like the way that's handled and the interactions with like the stake president stuff. It was just not right, and the church disciplinary hearing was weird.
And again, it might not be accurate, but in terms of like the show, like it wasn't really material, right? I mean,
no.
Yeah.
But for me, it just contributed to this portrayal of church leaders on a local level as this very bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Which it really isn't.
Oh, we do have a lot of bureaucracy though, don't we?
Yeah, but it's not like the people in the place are like these career bureaucrats.
Oh, sure, no.
Well, I think in all of our experiences, bishops, stake presidents, are kind of full of love. You describe them as very loving people. That did not come through with church leadership in Big Love.
Yes.
I've never met a mean bishop.
And I also think the main thing that they did a favor toward the church is that the main characters of Under the Banner of Heaven and Big Love were Bill Paxton and Andrew Garfield, who are two of the more likable actors in Hollywood. Yeah. So they're very sympathetic, easy to root for characters.
It was really good. There were a few lines of dialogue that popped up throughout that some of the members said that are just, they twist our beliefs just a little bit. Like, I think at the end of season 2, the neighbor is really distraught because she can't get pregnant, and she makes this statement of like, if I can't have children in this life, then we won't have an eternal family, and that just goes against our beliefs. Actually,
that's the one thing I was going to bring up. It made it sound like the only reason her husband, she's valuing her, is to have babies for him.
Well, I mean,
that's more of a polygamous.
But I think we all know people who certainly, for them, having more and more and more kids is certainly like a badge of honor. I could certainly see how someone, if they weren't able to have children, how they would feel, even if it's not true and if that's not the intent, would certainly feel like they are being.
Well, yeah, the stress in the marriage, I think, is accurate, because I can see.
Well, not just within the marriage, but certainly within the church would feel like less than, and not that they should, but I'm sure that some of them do feel like that way, right? Because there is a big emphasis on have as many kids as you possibly can.
Yeah, and that aspect of it is fine. It's just that statement that she makes about, I'm not going to have a family in eternity. It's just like...
It was silly. But
so I think if you heard this Big Love conversation, it sounds like they did a negative job about the church, but I think we've brought up everything that was negative in a 5-season show without talking about the 90% of things that were actually really good.
Yeah.
We should talk about the Book of Mormon musical, which I was reading, I think is the 5th highest grossing musical of all time. 5th? So it is among the longest running and highest grossing ever on Broadway. So unlike Big Love, Heretic, Under the Banner of Heaven, the Book of Mormon musical the purpose of it is to satirize the church.
Yes.
So maybe even more difficult to watch for members of the church. What do you think?
You think the purpose of the musical was to criticize the church?
Not criticize, satirize. It's a satire. It's a comedy about the church.
Because I always felt like, to me, the show was about two young, naive guys going out into a world they don't understand, trying to better it in their own sort of roundabout, goofy way. And they were Mormons in the show, but they could have been charity workers, aid workers. They could have been picking Peace Corps. They could have been UN.
I think there was a lot about the musical that was very specific to
there was.
So,
there was.
It becomes a completely different thing if you swap it out and try to make it anything else.
But the point is, the play does pretty much just make fun of the church the whole way through.
It does.
In very irreverent terms at points. Mm-hmm. Is it fair at all to our churches, or is it a total just hit piece?
It's not a total hit piece. It is extremely well done satire. Like, all of the points, all of the jokes and all of the songs and stuff, most of them aren't accurate, but it's not meant to be accurate. It's meant to be over-exaggerated.
They're not trying to educate.
Well, it's meant to be over-exaggerated and satirical. And I think to that point, every song and every joke has that necessary kernel of something that is actually legitimate at the core of it. The only thing about is because at the very beginning he's like, you've been training for 2 years, and
then they go on their 2-year mission.
And then they go on that. Yeah. And and then it's like at the end of training for 2 years, they're told where they're going and who they're going to be with, and they're going to be with that person the entire time.
Yeah.
Whereas in reality, you find out where you're going, and then you go to a training center for depending if you have to learn a foreign language or not. It's like 3 weeks or 6 weeks, and then you go, and then while you're there, every 6 weeks there's the chance for you changing who you're with, and so you're not with the same person.
They made it seem more like getting drafted to the army.
But I think that's almost part of the joke, though, because it would have been the easiest thing in the world for them to research how this stuff actually works. The fact that he didn't bother and just had a guess at it is kind of what makes it even funnier. The fact that they didn't even Wikipedia it, they didn't even Google it, they just had a real wild stab at how they think this stuff works. It kind of, to me, actually even made it funnier.
It looked good on stage. It was like you see them coming down from a line, like you're my companion. It's very musical. Spotlights.
It'd be really weird in the musical if they had to wait for transfers and they got new. Maybe it was just convenience as well.
And as far as the theatrical production, you can see why it's so popular. It is incredible. Mm-hmm. The writing, the music, the staging.
Oh my gosh,
the choreography. Yeah. It's phenomenal. The production. Yeah. And it's entertaining throughout.
Yes.
Like 2 hours, and you can't take your eyes off it.
It's hilarious. Right?
Very,
It
very,
is
It
really
is
very
absolutely
funny.
hilarious. And this, to be honest,
funny.
we can talk about it in all day. Like, were certain songs going too far, and what was it appropriate, and what should they have done that? I still maintain the position that the fact is nobody can say, "Oh, that's not funny." Or I mean, if someone says something or sings something and you laugh at it, it's funny. You can't simply because you get offended by it doesn't stop it from being funny. And if you go to a musical written by Matt Stone and Trey Parker, you know what you're going to get, right? You know exactly what you're going to get. You're not going to get surprised. So if you don't like their stuff and if you're easily offended, then just don't bloody see it. Like I remember, like when it came out, it was just debuting in London, and I was still in the UK. At the stake level, they was making like a fairly big deal of it, like almost like this is outrageous, this is an attack on the church, and they was getting all like, kind of like borderline militant about it. Like, come on, like if you don't like it, just don't see it.
That is something that annoys me, not just, in our religion, generally religious or conservative people prejudging something and not being open-minded about things. On the flip side, we have a lot of media produced by our church, which I think can also be considered inaccurate because it's very romanticized Disney.
Oh, and it's garbage. Let's just be honest, it's garbage as well. BYU TV is garbage. It's crap. Come on, be honest. Is there a single good, decent church movie ever? And don't say the bloody Russian thing.
I never saw, but people do love that.
Everyone goes on about it. And I've seen it, and you know what? It's not that great.
For example, there's a 90s movie about Joseph Smith era pioneers called Legacy. Did you ever see it?
Yeah.
Have you heard of this movie?
I've heard of it. I've not seen it. I don't watch them.
There's a scene in it, I think right before Joseph Smith dies, the mob is gathered together and they're working themselves into a frenzy about how bad Mormons are. So the one line he has is like, "These Mormons are weird. They don't even believe in slavery." And everyone's like, "Boo, boo." Like, that's not why Joseph Smith was killed, because he loved equality. It was because of polygamy.
Yeah.
But they don't address that at all in the movie.
Yeah, but to the contrary of Gary's experience, my experience is everything I heard was like, yeah, it's like we could take a joke. We're not upset about it. Like the church is advertising and saying, hey, like you've seen the musical, now read the book. We didn't try to shut it down.
That's the way
we
to
just
go.
tried to use it as advertising.
Yeah.
And so my experience was people weren't offended by it, and they're kind of taking advantage of it.
So in my view, the Book of Mormon play, it was critical of organized religion, not just ours, organized religion in general, but I don't feel like it was critical of missionaries. I feel like the message was good people should do good things. You don't need the religion to be good.
But again, just playing devil's advocate, the two main characters, right? You got Elder Price, who was an arrogant,
Goody two-shoes.
yeah, arrogant, goody two shoes,
Self-righteous.
self-righteous asshole, and his companion Cunningham, who was a nice guy but was a fucking moron. And don't forget, like, Elder Cunningham, who actually turned out to be like the hero of the story. He saved the day by just lying to everyone and making up scripture and revelations to steer people towards how he wanted them to behave.
Yeah, but in the end, he was telling them what they wanted to hear and help their lives be better. And in the end, their lives were better.
So I went back in time and I read all the reviews from the initial run of the Book of Mormon play, Vanity Fair, New York Times, New York Post, all of these reviews, see what people said. Okay. I was surprised at how everyone felt like how warm the message was. People came out, they feel like they got something good out of it. And actually, I saw a couple of reviews that were actually kind of profound. I think these critics were getting something out of it. Like one of them was like, there's a coffee joke about the elder drinking, you're not supposed to drink coffee. He's like, drinking one cup of coffee being prohibited might seem like a silly thing, but really what these missionaries are doing is building up habits over time of self-control over little things, so that when big things come later in life, that they're more prepared for it. And that was from the New York Times.
Interesting.
So I was shocked that critics got kind of like warm Christian messages out of the Book of Mormon play. It is in there under a lot of dirtiness.
Which, to be fair, that's exactly what Matt Stone and Trey Parker do throughout their whole careers in South Park. It's often a very good and often very intelligent message, just dressed up under a lot of crude language and dirty humor. Yeah, which is the best way to do it, in my opinion.
I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed the musical.
It was one of the best I've ever seen.
Here's a question, though. Here's a question. I feel like most members could sit there and watch the whole musical if it wasn't for the one song. And you know what song we're talking about?
Yeah.
Do you guys feel like they crossed the line?
I don't.
Oh, okay.
Because I mean,
and I agree with you. I'm just surprised.
I have seen people that have legitimately been in that state where they're dealing with so much stuff in their life that they're angry at God.
Right.
And it's satirical, it's comedy, but they have that phrase, F you God. I mean, it's just like, when things are going round, you just say that, F you God. It's just like the curse to heaven.
So I would like to go through the shows we've talked about, and if you think members of the church could watch or you could recommend it for them. For the Book of Mormon play, I don't think I could. I think it's too much for most members of the church.
But
content-wise, explicit
South Park's too
content-wise.
much for most of them. And if you can't do South Park, you certainly can't do the Book of Mormon musical.
I mean, I would recommend it to certain members, but not
the
everybody.
South Park loving members. There are some.
Well, because it's
like
it
three of
depends
us.
on. It really depends on where your line is when it comes to vulgar language. Because there are some members that will not they do not want to tolerate vulgar language
I just hate those ones.
at all. And then there are others that, I mean, maybe they don't use vulgar language, but they don't care if they hear it. And so I would not recommend it to people that are offended by vulgar language.
So you could say they make fun of the church, but the real loser in the Book of Mormon play is the Africans. The Africans are all stereotypes, the worst stereotypes of Africa.
Yeah, I remember reading a review of back when it was first coming out in London, and the biggest complaint in this review, and I can't remember what it was one of the London newspapers, was, and forget the fact about the religion, it was that this thing is racist.
I would be more offended African watching this play than Mormon watching this play.
The girl sending a text message on a typewriter. It was funny, it's tragic.
When I was reading that when the George Floyd Black Lives Matter thing happened, they actually rewrote the play a little bit
Oh, really?
from the African side of things.
What did they? Do you know what they changed?
I don't know, but I think the black cast was like, screw this. We're not going to live up to these stereotypes that are harmful.
Yeah.
So it has changed over time.
Interesting.
So no, I would say members of the church, unless you love South Park, don't watch Book of Mormon play.
Yeah.
Well,
I could agree with that.
let's not be part of the fascist bandwagon. We'll not say don't watch it. Maybe we'd recommend if you're a little sensitive cupcake.
Well, and when Book of Mormon play came out, I had coworkers, none of the members of the church, and they were like, "Oh, like you're Mormon, you should go watch the play. I've just seen it. It's funny or it's great." So I don't think anyone else thinks it's offensive toward us. They all had a great time watching it. So I don't know if it did anything negative toward our church.
No, I certainly don't think it did. And to be honest, if you thought our church was stupid beforehand, the musical's not going to change your mind, but it's not going to persuade you to the contrary. But
when I went into watching it, I knew it was satire. I knew they would be making jokes, and so that was my mentality. So, like I said, it's like almost every song and almost every joke. Like I could see that kernel of something that's true even in my experiences. Like I was a missionary, and all those missionaries and all that stuff is just like I saw a lot of that, obviously way less exaggerated and different and more real, but I mean those nuggets were there in all of that.
Okay, so, Under the Banner of Heaven, I would say only if you don't want language and violence and a temple scene. So if that sets you off, don't go see it. Otherwise, it's not like a church hit piece. It's about FLDS cultists being insane.
Yeah, I thought it was really well done, other than like I said, the way they used the vocabulary.
Big Love, I think I would recommend almost anything. In fact, Big Love is shockingly clean for HBO because the characters are Mormon and they're trying to not cuss and do bad stuff. So it almost matches with the standards of the church while you watch it.
It's kind of a horny show, though.
To HBO standards, there is very, very, very little nudity. There's almost like
That's true, actually, there isn't a lot of nudity.
I was shocked by how little nudity, especially because they still have like some sex scenes and stuff.
They're having sex with all their clothes on most of the time.
Yeah, they didn't show anything.
You do see Bill Paxton's butt like a dozen times. It's like you could see this kind of content on the CW.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree.
Okay, and then Heretic.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, anyone who doesn't mind the blood and gore.
Of which, to be fair, there isn't a lot of blood and gore, is it?
Yeah, there isn't a lot, but I think Heretic was very suspenseful thriller.
But you know exactly what would happen, right? If the entire church went to go and see that movie tomorrow, at least 50% of them would be pissed off afterwards because he's trying to say religion's not. Well, I'm not going to give spoilers away, but they'd be mad that someone even made a movie where they even dared, even in a theatrical, dramatic sense, try to challenge their beliefs.
Guess what? He loses in the end.
You just spoiled the end. We can't say it because we'll spoil it for people watching this. All 4 of you.
And 3 of them are us. Okay, so overall, how do we feel about the portrayal of Mormons in media?
We are satired a lot, but to be honest, to some extent, we probably deserve it. We are kind of weird and goofy. We should just we should just roll with it and don't be sensitive about it and enjoy all the great comedy that comes with it.
Generally shown as good-hearted, good-natured, trying to do their best kind of people. Maybe a little naive and gullible here and there, but that's not the worst thing in the world to be.
No, they're definitely not. They're not portrayed as assholes or anything like that. Yeah, fine. Go watch it. Show it to the kids in primary. Turn it off.
Just turn it off.
Turn it off like a light switch, just go click.